And how does he establish his authority? What does he give in evidence for the idea that you should listen to him and not someone else?
Wasn't it that it's his own message, he didn't take it from anyone else? He didn't copy it from someone else?
Right. What he says is that he received the gospel directly from Jesus. Right? Remember when I said before that Paul talks a little bit about his conversion experience? This is one of the few places in his letters where he talks about his conversion experience. Look in chapter 1, verse 11. For I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel the gospel that was proclaimed by me is not of human origin. For I did not receive it from a human source, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. Right? Why should you listen to me? Well, I didn't hear it from my mom and dad. I didn't hear it from my neighbor. I heard it from God directly. Now, I don't know. I tend to distrust people who tell me they heard it from God directly, but this is how he's trying to establish his authority. Don't listen to those other people. They've got the story secondhand. I've got it firsthand. I got it directly from God. Verse 13. You have heard, no doubt, of my earlier life in Judaism. I was violently persecuting the church of God and was trying to destroy it. Presumably he was we've already established that he's a Pharisee, but presumably he was a Pharisee who was bent on criticizing the followers of Jesus. I advanced in Judaism beyond many of the people. I advanced in Judaism beyond many among my people of the same age, for I was far more zealous for the traditions of my ancestors. Right? He's just saying, I was a goody two-shoes as a Jew. I worked really hard to be a good boy. But when God, who had set me apart before I was born and called me through his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son to me so that I might proclaim him among the Gentiles, I did not confer with any human being, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were already apostles before me, but I went away at once into Arabia, and afterwards I returned to Damascus. Ehrman brought up this point before. I'll get that in just a second. Ehrman brought up this point before. How is this claim different than what it says in the Acts of the Apostles?
It's kind of like a question maybe towards that. Is after the reading in the New Testament, it says after he says that it was his own words, and it says now 3 years later it wasn't his words. He went to Jerusalem and talked to other people.
Well, he's not saying, and then I got it secondhand. He's just saying, I waited, it was 3 long years before I even talked to anybody at Jerusalem about it. So the reason why he mentions going to Jerusalem is to say it was much later. It was 3 whole years later when I went to Jerusalem. But how does this contrast with what it says in Acts? Aaron pointed this out in the introductory chapter on Paul. Remember? Anybody have an inkling?
You're talking about when the Acts says that his mission is addressed to the Jews? Is that what you're saying?
No, it was around there, but that's not the thing. Look at, find the page number.
Is it on page 237?
No. Aha, here we go. Look at 184 and 185. If you look on 185, the left column, the third paragraph. Other differences are of greater importance. For example, Paul is quite emphatic in the epistle to the Galatians that after he had his vision of Jesus and came to believe in him, he did not go to Jerusalem to consult with the apostles. This is an important issue for him in Galatians because he wants to prove to the Galatians that his gospel did not come from Jesus' followers in Jerusalem, the original disciples in the church around him, but from Jesus himself. His point is that he has not corrupted a message, the point that is that he has not corrupted a message that he received from someone else. His gospel came straight from God with no human intervention. The book of Acts, of course, provides its own narrative of Paul's conversion. In this account, however, Paul does exactly what he claims not to have done in Galatians. After leaving Damascus, some days after his conversion, he goes directly to Jerusalem and meets with the apostles. Right? So the book of Acts says that right after he saw Jesus, he went to Jerusalem and began consulting with the apostles. In Galatians, he says, I didn't even go anywhere near Jerusalem for 3 whole years. And this is important to him in Galatians. Why? Because that means that he is not giving a second-hand version of the gospel. He's given the God's honest truth as he received it directly from Jesus. He goes on, I'll just mention briefly, he goes on in chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, or I guess 1 through 14. He says, when I did go to Jerusalem, I argued with Peter. What did he argue with Peter about? They argued specifically about whether or not it was okay to eat with Gentiles. Peter wasn't eating with Gentiles. Paul said, why would you be exclusive that way? You should eat with Gentiles. It was a sticking point for Paul because for Paul, especially in Galatians, the law isn't that important. Of course it's okay to eat with Gentiles. Of course it's okay to eat with people who are not circumcised because circumcision isn't all that important. That's part of what Paul's bringing up. That's why the fight with Peter here is significant. Goes on to talk about justification. And this is the center part of Paul's theology, and it's the central message of Galatians and the central message of Romans. Romans is very similar to Galatians, except it's like 5 times as long and a lot more complex. So we're reading the shorter version. But what is justification? Ehrman talks about this and Paul talks about this, so we should have some inkling of what justification is. Jim?
Just having faith in Jesus rather than following Jewish law.
Well, he says having faith in Jesus justifies you, but what does it mean to be justified?
Be right with God.
Yeah. Justification simply means to be right with God. If you're not right with God, what's going to happen to you? Well, Paul doesn't really talk about hell. What does he talk about? For Paul, the options are not heaven and hell. What are the 2 options? Or resurrection or just death, right? He doesn't talk really about heaven and hell. He talks about you're either dead or you can experience resurrection and enter into the kingdom. So, if you're not justified, you get death. If you are justified, you get resurrection, or if you're still alive when Jesus comes back, you never have to be resurrected because you're already alive.